Have you ever wondered what could possibly lead a man to oversee the death of millions? The man in question is Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, one of the most notorious concentration camps in human history. Born in Baden-Baden, Germany in 1901, Höss was raised in a strict Catholic household. His father, a former army officer, had high expectations for his son, envisioning a religious life for him. But the young Höss had other plans. He was drawn to the military, enamored by the discipline and order it promised. In his late teens, Höss served in the Freikorps, a paramilitary group involved in suppressing the uprisings that followed World War I. This was his first taste of power, and it was intoxicating. By the time the Nazi Party came to power in 1933, Höss was ready to serve. His loyalty to the party, coupled with his military experience, catapulted him up the ranks. In May 1940, Höss was assigned to Auschwitz, a concentration camp located in German-occupied Poland. He wasn't simply a figurehead. He was actively involved in the design and operation of the camp, and under his command, Auschwitz expanded rapidly, becoming a central hub in Hitler's final solution. But who was this man really? Those who knew him described Höss as cold, detached, a man who saw his prisoners not as individuals, but as numbers on a ledger. He was a meticulous record keeper, documenting every death as if it were a business transaction. There was no room for empathy in Höss's world. His job was to implement the final solution, and he did so with chilling efficiency. Höss's reign at Auschwitz was marked by unprecedented horror. Under his watch, millions of innocent lives were extinguished through gassing, burning, starvation, and disease. His methods were brutal, his cruelty unbounded, yet he remained unflinching, carrying out his duties with a disturbing level of detachment. Höss oversaw unimaginable atrocities, a task he performed with chilling efficiency. His story serves as a stark reminder of the depths of inhumanity to which people can sink when blinded by ideology and the intoxicating lure of power. As commandant of Auschwitz, Höss was responsible for the deaths of countless innocent lives. His reign was marked by an unspeakable level of cruelty and inhumanity. The conditions at Auschwitz under his command were horrific, as if plucked from the vilest nightmares of humanity's collective psyche. Life in Auschwitz was a daily ordeal of suffering and despair. The prisoners, stripped of their identity and dignity, were subjected to relentless physical and psychological torment. The living conditions were atrocious. Overcrowding, malnutrition, and lack of sanitation made the camp a breeding ground for disease. But disease was not the most feared executioner in Auschwitz. That title belonged to the methods of extermination meticulously designed and implemented by Höss and his subordinates. The most infamous method was the gas chambers. These chambers, disguised as shower rooms, were the final destination for millions. Victims were led into these rooms under the pretense of a shower, only to be met with a deadly cloud of Zyklon B, a cyanide-based pesticide. The efficiency of this method was chilling and reflected Höss's cold, calculated approach to mass murder. Burning was another form of extermination. Bodies, often still warm, were tossed into crematoriums, their ashes scattered or used as fertilizer. The smoke from the crematoriums was a constant reminder of the relentless machine of death that Auschwitz had become. Starvation too was a common executioner. Food rations were pitifully inadequate, and prisoners were often worked to exhaustion on an empty stomach. Many succumbed to the gnawing hunger, their bodies too weak to fight off disease or withstand the brutal labor. Yet despite the unimaginable suffering, the spirit of humanity flickered in the darkness. Stories of resistance, camaraderie, and defiance emerged from the depths of despair, a testament to the indomitable human spirit. In 1943, Höss was relieved of his command, but his reign of terror was far from over. His departure did not bring an end to the horrors of Auschwitz. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new chapter of atrocities, one that would see the extermination of Hungarian Jews under his returned command. The shadow of Höss's reign continued to loom over Auschwitz, a grim reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink. In 1944, Höss returned to Auschwitz with a new, sinister mission. This time, his task was not just the administration of the camp, but the execution of a horrific plan: the extermination of Hungarian Jews. A task so monstrous, it would mark the darkest chapter in the annals of Auschwitz. The scale of this operation was staggering, the intensity unimaginable. Day after day, train after train rolled into Auschwitz, each one carrying hundreds, sometimes thousands of innocent lives destined for a horrific end. Men and women, old and young, their only crime was their heritage, their faith. In the name of a warped ideology, these lives were snuffed out with ruthless efficiency. Gas chambers worked overtime, belching out smoke as they consumed the lives of the innocent. The air was thick with the stench of death, a grim testament to the scale of the tragedy unfolding. And overseeing it all was Höss, the orchestrator of this final wave of extermination. With cold detachment, he supervised the operation, ensuring that the machinery of death ran smoothly, efficiently. Yet, even as this horror unfolded, the end was in sight. The Allies were closing in, their armies advancing across Europe. The tide of the war was turning, and with it, Höss's time at Auschwitz was running out. The end came in January of 1945. As the Red Army approached, Höss and his staff fled Auschwitz, leaving behind a testament to man's capacity for evil. In the wake of their departure, the world would come to learn the true scale of the atrocities committed under Höss's command. With the end of the war, Höss's time at Auschwitz came to a close, but his story was far from over. His capture, his trial, and his eventual execution would provide a grim coda to his reign of terror, a final reminder of the man who had overseen the darkest chapter in human history. In the aftermath of the war, the hunters became the hunted. The world had changed drastically, and those who had once held the power of life and death in their hands found themselves on the run. Among them was Rudolf Höss, the infamous commandant of Auschwitz, the architect of the horrors that had taken place within its barbed wire fences. Höss's flight from justice came to an abrupt end when he was captured by British forces. The men who captured him were far from gentle. They sought information, and they were prepared to extract it by any means necessary. Höss was subjected to a brutal beating, a physical torment that paralleled the mental anguish he had inflicted on millions. The methods employed by his captors were harsh, perhaps mirroring the severity of Höss's own actions. Interrogation techniques of the time were not for the faint-hearted. There was no room for sympathy for a man like Höss, who had shown none for those under his command at Auschwitz. The beating Höss underwent was severe. His captors didn't hesitate to use their fists, boots, and the butts of their rifles. They were relentless in their pursuit of information, a grim reflection of the relentless machinery of death that Höss had overseen at Auschwitz. But it wasn't just physical torture that Höss endured. The psychological torment was equally intense. He was kept in isolation, deprived of human contact and the basic comforts of life. He was left alone with his thoughts, his guilt, and his fears. The torture of Höss was brutal, reflecting the brutality of the crimes he had committed. It was a dark mirror held up to the face of a man who had overseen the death and suffering of millions. Höss's capture marked a turning point, but justice was yet to be served. His ordeal was far from over, for the world demanded more than just his capture. They demanded accountability, they demanded justice, and they would not be satisfied until Höss had answered for his crimes. In the face of overwhelming evidence, Höss stood trial for his crimes. It was a moment of reckoning that the world had been waiting for. The man responsible for the deaths of millions was finally going to answer for his actions. The trial of Rudolf Höss was a spectacle that drew the attention of the world. The evidence against him was colossal and damning. Testimonies from survivors, documents from the camp, and even Höss's own admissions painted a grim picture of the atrocities he had overseen at Auschwitz. The court heard tales of gassing, burning, starvation, and disease, each one more horrifying than the last. The sentencing came swiftly. Höss was found guilty on all counts. His punishment was to be the ultimate one: death. It was a sentence that many felt was the only fitting end for a man who had shown such disregard for human life. In the days leading up to his execution, Höss was reported to have shown remorse for his actions. He admitted his crimes, expressing a level of guilt that had been absent during his time at Auschwitz. It was a stark contrast to the man who had once overseen the mass extermination of innocent people. The day of the execution arrived. Höss was led to the gallows at Auschwitz, the very place where he had ordered the deaths of millions. It was a chillingly poetic end for a man who had been the architect of so much suffering. As the noose tightened, the world watched on, the memory of his victims forever etched in their minds. Rudolf Höss, once the commandant of Auschwitz, met his end at the very place he had overseen the death of millions.